Mr. Speaker, I take great pleasure this afternoon in introducing the National Minimum Wage Order 2012 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order 2012 for review and consideration by this Honourable House. The question of whether or not to increase the minimum wage and the extent of any such increase has always been an issue which elicits heated debate and discussion from various quarters of the society. According to an ILO paper entitled Minimum Wages, Wage Fixing Machinery Application and Supervision, Geneva, published in 1992, it says the intended objectives of establishing minimum wages are to prevent exploitation of workers by employers, to promote a fair wage structure, to provide a minimum acceptable standard of living for low-paid workers, and eventually to alleviate poverty, especially among working families. In Jamaica, the authority of the Minister of Labour to fix a minimum wage is established by Section 3 of the Minimum Wage Act. This section gives the Minister the authority by ministerial order to set a minimum wage for any occupation in the island, either generally or in any specified area, for persons employed in certain occupations where the wages paid are considered to be unreasonably low. Mr. Speaker, I hasten to emphasize that minimum wage legislation merely institutes a threshold for minimum standards. In other words, it is a flooring and not a ceiling. This means that employers are encouraged to pay wage rates which are higher than the minimum wage. However, they cannot pay wage rates which are below the established minimum standards. Mr. Speaker, over the past 30 years, the practice in this country has been to utilize the National Minimum Wage Order 1975 to set the wage rate for all sectors, including household workers, and to use the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order of 1982 to fix a minimum wage for persons employed as security guards to companies who provide security services. This practice has persisted because these are the category of workers who are still most vulnerable to exploitation in relation to the wages paid to them. You know, Mr. Speaker, I dream of the day when there will be no need to establish a minimum wage for these categories of workers. As employers and employees in these occupations work together to negotiate and determine adequate wages. However, the unfortunate reality is that this day has not yet arrived. Mr. Speaker, the legislature has ensured that a consultative approach is taken by the Minister when determining whether to increase the minimum wage. To this end, Section 4 of the Act has established a tripartite body referred to as the Minimum Wage Advisory Commission. Pursuant to Section 4A of the Minimum Wage Act, one of the main functions of this commission is to advise the Minister on all matters relating to the national minimum wage and any other minimum wage which may be fixed under the Act. On the 6th of June 2012, I directed the Minimum Wage Advisory Commission to review the national minimum wage and the minimum wage for industrial security guards. This decision was taken because this administration recognizes that the current economic climate has negatively impacted the spending power of these workers. Mr. Speaker, in furtherance of its mandate and in determining whether to increase the minimum wage, the Commission invited the participation of the general public in determining via the print and electronic media. Letters were also sent to various organizations, including NGOs, inviting the submissions of recommendations to the Commission to assist in its review. Regional consultations were held with various interest groups representing the 14 parishes in Jamaica. In the northwestern region, St. James, Hanover, Westmoreland and Trelawney. In the northeastern region, St. Ann, Portland and St. Mary. And the south central region, Manchester, St. Elizabeth and Clarendon. In the greater Kingston region, consultations were held in Kingston, St. Andrew, St. Catherine and St. Thomas. Mr. Speaker, the Commission heard oral presentations and also received written submissions from key stakeholders, which include the following entities: the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Jamaica Employers Federation, the Jamaica Household Workers Association, the Jamaican Society for Industrial Security, the Union of Schools, Agricultural and Allied Workers, the National Workers Union, the Sugar Producers Federation, the Jamaica Security Guards Association, and Task Force Security Company Limited. In recommending an increase in the minimum wage, the Commission took into consideration factors such as the current state of the economy, the recession, the cost of utilities, the increased cost in transportation, the rising costs of food and fuel prices, the government's recovery program and its current deliberations with the International Monetary Fund. I want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank the members of the Commission and the Ministry staff who provided Secretariat services for their yeoman's contribution in diligently undertaking the task in such a relatively short time frame. The country is indebted to you all for your exemplary service. Mr. Speaker, having weighed all these factors and reviewed the report of the Minimum Wage Advisory Commission, I hereby ask this Honourable House to affirm the following increases which have been approved by Cabinet on July 16, 2012. The proposed increases are to become effective on September the 3rd, 2012. 1. The national minimum wage is to be increased from $4,500 per 40-hour work week, or $112.50 per hour, to $5,000 per 40-hour work week, or $125 per hour. That's 11%. 11%. 11%. You never give 11%. 11%. Over 2 years. The minimum wage for industrial security guards to be increased from $6,655 per 40-hour work week, or $166.38 per hour, to $180.76 per hour, or $7,230.40 per 40-hour work week. Laundry allowance for industrial security guards to be increased from $30.25 per hour to $33.30 per hour. Firearm premium allowance payable to industrial security guards to be increased from $32.28 per hour to $36.60 per hour. Dog handlers premium allowance payable to industrial security guards to be increased from $22.39 per hour to $24.63 per hour. There will be no further increase at this time in insurance coverage to be provided by employers for security guards who are killed or injured in the line of duty, which currently stands at $2 million. These proposed adjustments constitute an 11% increase in respect of the national minimum wage and a 10% raise for industrial security guards from the previous rates established in 2011. Mr. Speaker, although I'm sure it will be argued that this adjustment is inadequate, I firmly believe that this level of increase will assist in alleviating some of the suffering of these vulnerable workers without having a substantial disemployment effect. By this I mean that it is manageable for the average employer and will therefore not prompt any mass dismissals or of the very workers it is intended to protect. The increase is also in principle consistent with the government's international commitment to seek to achieve decent work for all workers. This includes work which is productive and delivers a fair income for all. As such, Mr. Speaker, I now seek the affirmative resolution of this Honourable House in relation to the National Minimum Wage Order 2012 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order 2012. On the other foot, the argument swings the other way. I remember one year the member who spoke from North Central Clarendon said the money couldn't buy 2 ice mint. And the year when he gave the increase, it was a smaller percentage than what we gave. So it's a matter of toing and froing. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, we have come to a point where we have to look much more deeply into how we can do a new construct of this matter. And the suggestion by the opposition spokespersons and on our side here does have merit in respect of setting up a commission to do a fulsome study on the whole business of what constitutes a livable wage. Minimum livable wage. Livable wage. Livable. Because the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, while we have said on more than one occasion, and has firmly established, that the rates that we promulgate are rates that are the floor and not the ceiling. Right. Persons do take that to mean sometimes that is what they must pay, but a lot of people pay much more. I am sure that there is no member of this House, reasonably sure, that there is no member of this House that pays their household helper $5,000 a week. Reasonably sure. You don't pay. Because I think there are reasonable people inside this House. I don't think you want me to pay that. So I want to take on board, Mr. Speaker, the suggestion. The ministry will take it on board to have discussions on it and see if we can come with a new formula to the House next year. The Labour Advisory Council, which is constituted of members of the unions, the Jamaica Employers Federation and the government, we will discuss these matters at that Labour Advisory Council, because the Labour Advisory Council is a pivotal tripartite machinery that we can utilize to elicit this kind of substantial arguments that we have to settle this matter. It will take some time because it has wide implications. So it will take some time for the consultations to be done, but we are fully committed, accepting the suggestions, we are fully committed to moving forward with the Commission to discuss these things. So I want to appeal, Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, to all employers of conscience to pay reasonable salaries to their workers. To pay reasonable salaries. We subscribe as a country to the decent work agenda. We went to the ILO and we subscribed to it. And decent work includes decent pay and decent working conditions. So we have an obligation to ensure that those criteria are met. In respect of the question regarding the increases that will flow to persons with contracts with the state, it simply means, Mr. Speaker, that the particular ministry that is involved in offering those contracts will have to speak with the Ministry of Finance in respect of how to deal with those increases that may arise. So there is a way for it to be settled, and that is what has been the practice over the years in dealing with that situation. So I can assure the member that there should be no difficulty in getting the increases, getting the throughput for the increases through the government system. We know that security guards provide a very, very useful service to the country and to the establishments that they serve, whether private or public. And while we would like to raise the floor even higher, the truth is, Mr. Speaker, that again would present some kind of difficulty. And the member said that, gave an example of a man who was doing a 3 shift or, working more hours than ordinary. The fact is, sometimes a man sleeps on an 8-hour shift. So if he is doing 16 hours, it may not necessarily because the hours were too much. It could be for the one day. But the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we want to ensure that the system is geared in such a way that it does not disenfranchise or put anyone under pressure. And particularly for the security guards, the ministry will be considering going forward this year, looking into whether or not we can return to the days of a JIC arrangement for the security guard industry. Because that in itself will give them the ability to negotiate better wages with the employers, rather than to depend on the rates that we set in this House. That is something we are going to be actively pursuing. The unions have been calling for discussions on it, particularly led by the National Workers Union, and we are going to be again taking this matter to the Labour Advisory Council, where the JCTU, the Confederation has representation, and the employers, to see how we can streamline that approach so that the security guards industry can find themselves in a more affordable position. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, and taking all things into consideration, we'll be pursuing the recommendations for the Commission. I wish to ask that the motions be approved.
Could we have them one at a time?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I now move that the minimum wage industrial security guards amendment order 2012 resolution be approved.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against?
No.
Ayes have it. Ayes have it.
Also move, Mr. Speaker, that the minimum wage amendment order resolution 2012 be approved.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against?
No.
Ayes have it.
Aye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank God for his sustaining grace in our lives as parliamentarians. Amen. And I wish to extend sincere gratitude to the people of Southern St. James for the confidence that they continue to repose in me as their representative in this honorable house from 1989 till now. Mr. Speaker, they have afforded me a wonderful privilege over these many years, and I pledge to continue representing their interests with vigor and steadfast determination that they have been used to expecting of me over these many, many years. You know, 7 is a particular number, you know, and I only gone 6. So be careful. Be careful. If you tempt me, you will get the 7. Permit me also, Mr. Speaker, to thank the members of my immediate family for their unreserved understanding, patience, and love as I carry on my duties as a member of this cabinet, member of this house, and the representative of the people at the same time. But by no means last, Mr. Speaker, I wish to offer my thanks and appreciation to the Permanent Secretary and the staff of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. While I would not wish to blow my own trumpet, and I say that very deliberately. While I do not wish to blow my own trumpet, Mr. Speaker, I believe if we were to grade ministries and staff, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security would come out as the champion ministry in the government of Jamaica. And I want to thank every worker in that ministry, in every parish and at headquarters, from the bottom of my heart for their support over these many, many years, and the support to the government, whichever one is in power, and to the country. A very professional staff, very professional. Lastly, by no means least, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for your patience, particularly your patience with us in this house. I know you have been tested and tried many times, but you have come out with flying colors. And while your deputy is still on the learning curve, I also want to include him, and I know that he will rise to the occasion as time goes by. Yes, yes. Mr. Speaker, this is a very incredible year for us. A country of some 3.7 million souls. It is a year when our identity as a sovereign nation, after 50 years of independence from Whitehall, will be in the spotlight again at home and abroad. In a little over a week from now, we will be commemorating our Jubilee, and it promises to be a fantastic occasion. It will speak to our historical sense of courage, determination, community, patriotism, and purpose. And despite the attempts of the cynics among us to derail the meaning of this celebration, Mr. Speaker, no doubt influenced by the trouble-filled times in which we live, it is a certainty that our unbridled sense of nationalism will spur debate about our mission to craft a sense of nationhood and our identity going forward into the second decade of the 21st century and beyond. Within the context of this debate, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, which I have the honor to lead, proposes to have a voice. For despite the events of 1938 and the gallant struggles of Norman Manley's generation in winning political independence, along with Sir Alexander Bustamante, our mission to achieve economic independence is still a work in progress. And even as we prepare to celebrate the exploits of our athletes at the upcoming Olympics, the endurance of our parliament for all of 68 years, the internationalization of our music, art, poetry, scientific discoveries and culture, the strength of our two-party system, and our independence from colonial rule. Those of us who believe in Team Jamaica must be courageous enough to declare that these trends should evoke more patriotism and not less. My case this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, therefore, is this. We are all now at the end of an important phase of our development when all dispensations have all but outlived their purposes. Perceived knowledge or know-how now cry out for overhauling and retooling, if not for total replacement. And against this background, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, in the context of Jamaica 50 and beyond, is and will be concerned with 1, contributing to economic growth, 2, providing greater levels of social protection for vulnerable citizens, and 3, job creation. The successful attainment of these 3 goals, however, Mr. Speaker, and their contribution to the fulfillment of our mission of economic independence are predicated on us vastly improving our levels of productivity as a nation. And the awareness of what this implies for the growth and development of our productive forces, especially capital and labor. For us in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, productivity improvement based on the promotion of compensation systems stirred by productivity per se is good for the company, good for the workers, good for competitiveness, good for international trade, and good for Jamaica as a whole. The evidence also suggests, Mr. Speaker, that a national productivity-conscious culture will sustain an expansion in output, guarantee increases in tax revenue, profits and share prices, increase wages for workers, and provide for better provision of social and infrastructural services, lower inflation levels, leading to stable prices. Mr. Speaker, we in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security see future productivity growth seriously delivering to companies equitable compensation packages, which in turn will produce satisfied workers and robust competition, all leading to increased levels in international trade. Ultimately, the country will come to experience greater levels of job security, higher wages, and better working conditions. This, Mr. Speaker, is why I title my presentation this afternoon as Improved Productivity and Labour Market Efficiency, Pathways to Decent Work and Social Protection. Our preoccupation with productivity improvement as the basis for our economic prosperity is evidence-based. Evidence-based. The 2011 World Bank report, Jamaica Unlocking Growth, contends that Jamaica's slow economic growth rate over the past 4 decades can be attributed largely to disappointing productivity growth. Similarly, the 2010 Inter-American Development Bank report titled The Age of Productivity, Transforming Economies from Bottom Up, emphasizes that the economies of Latin America and the Caribbean, including Jamaica, suffer low productivity. Our emphasis and productivity growth as a priority strategy, then, Mr. Speaker, is far from being simplistic. We go where the evidence leads us, and the evidence before us leads us to appreciate that our more productive firms will always be in a better position to compete globally based on price, quality, and responsiveness. Such enhanced competitiveness, in other words, will ultimately lead to greater demand for the goods and services produced by our firms and inevitably greater profitability outcomes. The logic operating here, Mr. Speaker, is that these firms will be able in time to reinvest their profits so as to expand their operations, employ more workers, pay higher wages, and provide better working conditions, creating in the process a virtual cycle of growth and prosperity. Against this background, then, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to announce that the Ministry of Labour and Social Security will continue to work tirelessly to strengthen the capacity of the Jamaica Productivity Centre in its efforts to build a more productive and competitive Jamaica. Towards this end, I have already taken the following steps. We have appointed an advisory board to chart a new and creative path for the JPC. This board is chaired by Mr. James Rawle, who is assisted by Dr. Peter John Gordon as Deputy Chairman. And the board members comprise representatives from the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, the Jamaica Employers Federation, the government, academia, as well as independent business persons. We have also strengthened the physical and human resource assets of the Centre to enable it to deliver quality products and services to both private and public sector stakeholders. The new board is charged with ensuring that workers and management understand the link between productivity and compensation. This means, Mr. Speaker, that employers and trade unions must be assisted by it in understanding that the conjunctive nature of our collective bargaining process must be replaced by productivity bargaining as part of the new paradigm, gradually leading to our economic independence. At the national level, we must continue to pursue the tripartite approach, with the resultant effect that this will finally translate into levels of economic growth that fosters economic progress and social well-being. Our message on this score is very clear. We are on a mission to building a productivity-conscious culture in Jamaica that will influence the growth and development of productivity-driven organizations in both the public and private sectors. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, productivity must become everybody's business. Consistent with this mantra, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry is currently conducting its second labour market study involving a total of some 606 organizations. The study has sought to capture the perspective of employers island-wide as it relates to areas of growth and employment in the economy, gaps in the labour force as they relate to skilled labour, anticipated changes in the workforce, the extent to which migrant skilled workers are employed, and the employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. Speaking very preliminary, Mr. Speaker, we have found that of the 606 respondents, 218 employers reported that they had at least one vacant position over the past year. The percentage of vacancies was highest among the manufacturing sector, which was 54%, and this was followed by education with 41%. Employment opportunities, Mr. Speaker, were greater within businesses over 25 years old, with 49% of these indicating that they had a vacancy over the past year. Over the past 2 years, 54% of businesses in the manufacturing sector reorganized their operations, followed by education, 41.7%, and other community, social, and personal services, such as beauty parlors, security companies, and funeral homes, which accounted for some 37.8%. Of note, Mr. Speaker, is the discovery that approximately 34% of employers in the study indicated that they had either a need or additional need for skills training in their organizations in areas as diverse as administration, portfolio management, accounting, driving, customer service, and teaching. Overall occupations in short supply include forklift operators, engineers, gemologists, urologists, pharmacists, and curators for museums. With reference to anticipated changes in the workforce, approximately 32% of the employers have indicated that they anticipated an increase in the number of workers within their organization in the next 2 years, while some 25% expect no change, and only 6% projected a decrease of employers who anticipated an increase in their workforce. Approximately 46% cited expansion in business as the main reason for this projection. Mr. Speaker, preliminary results from the ongoing study further show that only 8% of the employers in the sample recruited workers from abroad, 85% of whom were recruited to fill positions as gemologists, senior executive managers, urologists, and teachers of science subjects, engineers, and medical officers. Insofar as employment opportunities for persons with disabilities are concerned, the study in question have found that 46, or approximately 8% of employers indicated that at least one person with a disability was employed to their organization. Happily, of the 560 employers who did not employ persons with disabilities, Mr. Speaker, approximately 35% of them have expressed a willingness to employ at least one person so affected within the next 12 months from now. Turn my attention, Mr. Speaker, to a subject that I know is very much on the minds of everyone inside this House, as many that are outside. That is the Overseas Employment Program. This year, Mr. Speaker, some 13,000 workers will be participating in the Canadian and US program. Traditionally, these workers were largely engaged in the agricultural and hospitality sectors. As many members of this Honourable House may be aware, there were some challenges with the US program. In 2009, the US authorities introduced new regulations prohibiting certain deductions from the wages of workers. And these included deductions for savings, health insurance, NIS contributions, and an administrative fee for the maintenance of the liaison service. Efforts were made at the official level, and my friend, the former minister, made a lot of efforts, but the matters were not resolved. I am happy to report, however, that in June of this year, I met with along with my delegation, I met with the US Department of Labor and the Department of State. And out of this meeting, Mr. Speaker, 3 of the 4 prohibited deductions were reinstated. We are continuing these discussions regarding the administrative fee, since the government is committed to maintaining the welfare services for the workers currently provided by the Jamaica Liaison Service. Despite these challenges, Mr. Speaker, I must assure the country this afternoon that the US and Canadian programs continue to grow. I make bold to mention that in recent times, the number of skilled workers traveling to Canada has been trending upwards. In addition to the 17 trailer drivers that left earlier and are already in Canada and employed, an additional 105 of them and some 50 mechanics and 4 welders have recently secured job offers over there. The success of the skilled workers program, Mr. Speaker, is part and parcel of a deliberate strategic plan by my team within the ministry to facilitate job creation for qualified Jamaicans in the Canadian labour market. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the oil sands of Western Canada are creating a rare chance for Jamaicans to benefit tremendously from the unfolding opportunities in that emerging market. Not only is the economic engine of Canada to be found increasingly in the West, but the country's political centre is also shifting westwards. The boom in the oil sands of Western Canada, coupled with that country's rapidly aging population and universally recognized labour market skills deficit, mean that opportunities for growth and expansion exist for developing countries like Jamaica as Canadian employers increasingly look to overseas markets for skilled workers. This is the magnet that saw me leading an experienced and energized delegation recently to British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and Alberta for discussions with federal and provincial government ministers and officials on topics ranging from immigration to human resource development, employment prospects for Jamaican workers in tourism and hospitality, automotive, and the healthcare industries, the Jamaica-Canada Skills Training Apprenticeship Program, the Red Seal Examination and Certification Program, and the future movement of skilled workers from Jamaica to fill existing gaps in the Canadian labour market. The success of the visit aforementioned Western Province of Canada, Mr. Speaker, can be measured by the factual outcome that we were able on behalf of Jamaica to secure agreements with provincial governments to enter into memoranda of understandings that will pave the way for the movement of Jamaican mechanics, welders, drivers, healthcare, hospitality, and agricultural personnel to work in Canada, and for the deepening of the long-standing framework of cooperation vis-à-vis the labour movement arrangements between Canada and Jamaica. Already, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry have had 2 of the largest trucking companies in North America, namely Finning, which is the distributor of all Caterpillar equipment, and Trimac, not only concretely expressing a willingness to partner with us going forward, but have gone ahead and submitted to us requests for skilled drivers and mechanics to fill job openings. Indeed, since my visit, other Canadian employers have also expressed a similar willingness to partner with us and the need for skilled workers. I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, that when we spoke with the Minister of Labour up there in Canada, we were told that they had vacancies for over 300,000 drivers. So the door is wide open there for us to train and certify our people so that they can get into the labour market. And that was just one example of what was there. This is the reason, Mr. Speaker, why to further facilitate the growth and expansion of the Canadian Overseas Employment Program by increasing the availability of new skill set The ministry is busily crafting the modality that will allow for the adaptation of the curricula of Canadian trade training organizations by local skills training institutions in order to minimize the cost to prospective workers. The intention here, Mr. Speaker, is to allow for the monitoring of local training programs by the respective Canadian professionals and authorities towards certification for employment in Canada. While we prepare them here locally, it makes things much easier. So when they leave here, they can go straight into work when they are taken over overseas. And I want to use the occasion, Mr. Speaker, to pay the respects of the government to the Canadian High Commission here in Jamaica. They have been very cooperative. Because of the workload that we have put on them to process these workers, they have gone beyond the call of duty on many occasions to try and process them in time so that we can get them to leave to satisfy the needs of the employers overseas. We wish to thank them very much for that. Mr. Speaker, in regards to the employment agencies, in light of the new regulations enacted by the United States prohibiting the payment of recruitment fees by migrant workers, the ministry has increased its monitoring of the activities of private employment agencies across the length and breadth of the island. This is to ensure full and unwavering compliance with the Employment Agency Regulations Act. During 2011-2012 fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, the ministry successfully conducted some 215 inspections island-wide on the activities of the private employment agencies. They also play a very critical role, and I want to encourage them, Mr. Speaker, to continue what they are doing, because many people leave this country through that process as well, and they are doing a good job. I want to commend them. The Industrial Disputes Tribunal, Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise the House that with the amendment of the Labour Relations and Industrial Dispute Act in March 2010, the Minister has the authority to refer non-unionized disputes to the Industrial Disputes Tribunal, leading to a more equitable industrial relations environment in the country. This is a most welcome development, I must tell you, signifying that non-unionized workers now have the opportunity to have their disputes resolved at the tribunal without the usual costs that are associated with civil court proceedings. And to date, Mr. Speaker, many persons are making use of that facility of going directly to the tribunal as individuals who have no unions to support them. Our push for productivity improvement and labour market efficiency, Mr. Speaker, to a large extent is dependent on having a stable industrial relations climate in the country. Luckily for us as a developing nation, the adversarial approach that shaped the relationship between trade unions and employers is not as prevalent now as it once was in the recent past. And the conclusion of the discussions between the Sugar Producers Federation and the unions is a clear example that the unions and the employers, that the progress that has been made and the maturity that has been shown in those discussions going on for so many months, and there was not one day of work stoppage. And I want to congratulate the unions and employers for this sense of maturity. Even in the context of an increase in the number of disputes referred to the conciliatory process, as a result of the March 2010 amendment to the LRIDA, allowing individual non-unionized workers to access the IDT, the country is witnessing today a more mature and realistic predisposition towards the settling of industrial disputes. This augurs well for the future development of the productive forces in the country. Mr. Speaker, we propose to be very strict in ensuring compliance with the Minimum Wage Act, which we have just passed, and given some new increases. The most frequently breached labor law by increasing the rate and pace of our inspection of workplaces via our pay and conditions of employment branch of the ministry and our parish-wide offices. For 2011-2012 financial year, the pay and conditions of employment unit within the ministry was instrumental in getting employers to pay over to workers some $108 million in entitlement under the labor laws. I want to issue a warning that in the months and years ahead, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security under my watch will not be averse to enforcing the labor laws of the country in the interest of productivity, fair play, and labor market efficiency.
Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to extend the minister's time. Sufficient time to allow him to complete his presentation.
The question is that the minister's time be extended sufficiently for him to complete his presentation. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? 25. Ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the safeguarding of safety and health of the worker is of paramount importance to the government and is an indispensable component of the productivity improvement culture. I have indicated that we are committed to nurturing it going forward. And as such, I wish to reiterate the commitment of the government to making occupational health and safety, the bill, a reality in Jamaica. Within the last 6 months, 2 draft bills have been received from the Chief Parliamentary Council, and we are working closely with that office to advance the process. We propose, Mr. Speaker, to have a settled draft bill for consultation with stakeholders shortly, and thereafter we propose to forward the bill to the Legislation Committee of Cabinet. Preceding this, we intend to have the bill tabled for debate in this Honourable House by the end of 2012. The other piece of legislation we proposed fast-tracking relates to the National Workplace Policy on HIV/AIDS. We will shortly place before the Cabinet a white paper outlining the National Workplace Policy on HIV/AIDS in order to facilitate its expression by legislative enactment. And this discussion, Mr. Speaker, was a lot of work was done by the former Minister in committee on this issue, and we want to acknowledge that as well. This white paper will include further adjustments which became prudent as a result of the more progressive directives from the ILO in the form of the Recommendation 200 of 2010. The recommendation reflects the need to strengthen the workplace prevention efforts and to facilitate access to treatment of persons living with or affected by HIV and AIDS. This, Mr. Speaker, is indicative of our commitment to ensuring that persons affected by HIV/AIDS are treated with dignity and decency in this country. Mr. Speaker, inspired by the fact that Jamaica was the first country in the world to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, I am very pleased to advise this Honourable House that, consistent with our commitment to upholding the rights and freedoms of persons with disabilities, we in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security will very shortly be tabling in this Parliament the National Disability Bill. It is a very serious bill, Mr. Speaker, and in furtherance of its enactment into law, we will be working feverishly to ensuring its swift passage through the Houses of Parliament. Several international stakeholders, including the Inter-American Development Bank, the government of Japan, have provided tangible support in helping us to build and strengthen our capacity to cater to the needs of the disabled. We thank them wholeheartedly for their continued support. We wish also to thank publicly the staff of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities and the Early Stimulation Program for the heroic work they continue to provide to the disabled community of this country. They are among the true patriots who have emerged from the firmament of the last 50 years of our post-independence history. And to them, Mr. Speaker, I say enough respect. Mr. Speaker, the free movement of persons for the purpose of engaging in gainful economic activity is one of the main pillars of the Caribbean single market and economy, the CSME, and is facilitated by the Caribbean Community Free Movement of Skilled Persons Act. A bill has been drafted to amend this act in compliance with the articles in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which addresses the freedom of movement of skilled CARICOM nationals within the region. The amendments will allow for the enlargement of the categories of skilled CARICOM nationals who are to be afforded freedom of movement. The categories include teachers, nurses, and artisans who have received a certificate of Caribbean vocational qualification, and household workers who have obtained a CVQ or equivalent qualification. The amendment will also make provision for the formalization of a single certificate system, which will make it easier for skilled nationals to exercise their freedom of movement. The verification of skilled workers' documents will no longer be carried out by asking the worker to resubmit documents already presented in his or her home country. This verification will instead be carried out by consultation between the Ministry and the competent authorities or member states. Currently, Mr. Speaker, the CARICOM skilled national certificates are issued free of charge to the applicant, but at a considerably high administrative cost to the Ministry. In keeping with the practice of some of our CARICOM neighbors, the Act will be amended to allow for the charging of a fee to recover some of these expenses. The opportunity will also be taken to increase the fines and penalties for breaching the provisions of the Act. The draft bill is now being reviewed by stakeholders. On the question of child labour, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica continues to address this burning issue through local and international collaboration. We joined the rest of the world on June 12th of this year in observance of World Day Against Child Labour by participating in a consultation workshop with our major social partners. The workshop examined the new draft policy on child labour, which will help to buttress the government's efforts and provide a more robust platform from which policies and programs can be implemented to address child labour. The draft policy is now subject to stakeholders' consultation, after which it will be submitted to Cabinet for approval. The vexed questions of work permit, Mr. Speaker. In keeping with the robust thrust towards national development, I would like to address the issuance of work permits and the progress we have made in controlling the number of jobs to foreign nationals. In the last 5 years, the economic downturn has negatively affected the recruitment of expatriate labour into the labour market. We have not only seen a reduction in the length of time requested for work permits, which is a minimum of 3 months to a maximum of 3 years, but there has been a significant reduction in the number of requests, from some 5,927 work permits, which were granted for a year ending 2006, as opposed to 1,798 granted for the first 6 months of this calendar year. The reduction, Mr. Speaker, can be attributed to the following actions: increased monitoring and investigation by the Ministry before work permits are granted, and the appropriate follow-up to ensure adherence to the conditions of the permits. Closer monitoring by us and other stakeholder agencies in cases where Jamaica understudies are assigned to positions filled by expatriates. Greater levels of cooperation between the Ministry, the Organized Crime Investigation Division, and the Passport and Immigration and Citizens Agency in an effort to minimize breaches in the conditions of work permits. Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House and the public at large can be assured that the Ministry of Labour and Social Security is firm in its resolve to approve only those foreign skill sets that are unavailable to assist with our continued socio-economic development, notwithstanding the fact that we are equally resolute in providing job security for our local human resources. The Ministry of Labour and Social Security, Mr. Speaker, lauds the contribution of domestic workers and the work that they have been doing in the development of the society. They create the capacity for thousands of Jamaicans to engage in gainful employment without the destabilization or, in some cases, disintegration of their domestic infrastructure, which may or may not involve children and aging relatives. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the groundbreaking Domestic Workers Convention 2011, C-189, seeks to promote and protect the human rights of all domestic workers. The Ministry supports this convention, which, when ratified, will protect and enhance the cause of domestic workers. The process of having the convention ratified has been initiated by seeking the guidance of the Attorney General's chambers as to legislative changes which may need to be implemented before it can be ratified. As such, Mr. Speaker, we await their response and stand ready to undertake any required action to facilitate Jamaica's ratification of this very important international instrument. I turn now very quickly, Mr. Speaker, to the G program being carried out by my ministry. Of course, you know, this is linked to the Ministry of Transport, Housing, Transport and Works, where the Secretariat resides. I'm pleased to report, Mr. Speaker, the participatory role of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security in the overall execution to date of the pioneering Jamaica Emergency Employment Program, commonly called JEEP. As is known to members of this House, JEEP is first and foremost a workforce intervention program aimed specifically at the 12.9% of the population who are currently unemployed and underemployed, and whose access to prevailing social safety net intervention mechanisms, furthermore, is extremely limited. JEEP is not meant to be a panacea for the country's long-term unemployment problem. The long-term objective is that the participants within the program will, based on the performance criteria, will find permanent employment within the organizations to which they are affiliated. Initially, when we started the program in May of this year, we had planned to target some 700 workers. But we have reorganized the program, Mr. Speaker, based on the funding. And we are now targeting 500 workers, and the The remittance has been moved from $4,500 per week to $6,000 per week. Mr. Speaker, members of this House will be heartened to learn that since we started the program, we have now engaged some 400 young persons. The Ministry, Mr. Speaker, is encouraged by the success of our program, and I wish to place on record my thanks, gratitude and admiration to the staff of the Ministry and that of the government, to all those private sector companies that have reposed confidence in the policy thrust of the government to move the more vulnerable of our human resource from the debilitating effects of welfare to the liberating heights of welfare. To be sure, we are not satisfied with the level of employment that we have attained under GP in the last 2 months, and as such we propose making representations to Cabinet for additional budgetary support, which will allow us to cater to an additional 250 young persons. The primary objectives of the program are to provide economic opportunities and employment and equip individuals with marketable skills as a basis for improving their prospects for long-term employment. Against this background, Mr. Speaker, the International Labour Organization has shown great interest in the program as a creative work intervention initiative to deal with the problem of unemployment, which it recognizes as a global phenomenon. And as such, it has engaged a consultant to work with the government of Jamaica in fine-tuning the modalities for the future implementation of the G program. And having regard to this, we believe that putting more Jamaicans to work, if not only temporarily, will guarantee greater levels of social stability, work ethics, skills transfer, cohesion between government and the private sector, and sanctity in the value of work. All of these will contribute to Jamaica being the place of choice to do business, live, and raise our children as we journey into the second decade of the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, as I speak about the youth, we also speak about the senior citizens. The latest official data indicates that our population is aging, with some 280,000 Jamaicans now 60 years and over. In fact, the fastest growing segment of the country's population is this age cohort, 65 years and over. Of significance also is the fact that the population 0 to 14 has fallen below 30%. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the government recognizes the role, contribution and needs of older persons in our society, and as such seeks to strengthen the work of the National Council for Senior Citizens established since 1976. We also propose to review our National Policy for Senior Citizens, adopted in 1997, to reflect emerging issues and trends. For the period 2012-2013, the National Council for Senior Citizens will focus on a review of the National Policy for Senior Citizens in accordance with the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. The Madrid Plan, Mr. Speaker, emphasizes adequate planning and programs for this group to ensure full utilization of their services and social protection systems so as to guarantee their well-being. The aging of our population, Mr. Speaker, should be viewed at this time as a challenge rather than a burden. Senior citizens are one of the great resources of our nation. They are the repository of our traditions, and consequently, it is the responsibility of all of us to enhance the self-reliance and functional independence of this valued group of citizens and to facilitate their continued participation in their families and the society at large. And I wish to acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, as well, the chairman of the National Council for Senior Citizens that's with us over there in the undercroft, Mrs. Syringa Marshall Burnett. Mr. Speaker, with reference to the National Insurance Scheme, which is the main contributory component of our social protection system, one of our main priorities is that of reducing the coverage gap. This has become necessary because only approximately 40% of the labour force is presently contributing to the scheme, and a mere 1/3 of those 60 years and older have actually met the contribution requirements for NIS pensions. This low coverage rate, Mr. Speaker and members of this House, is clearly related to the high level of informality in the labour market. Our long-term goal then, in face of this reality, is to have a minimum of 85% of the labour force prove eligible for benefits under the scheme consistent with the status quo that obtains in most developed countries and some developing countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have already commenced island-wide activities towards achieving 60% coverage by the year 2015. Given this focus, Mr. Speaker, it would be delinquent of me not to use this opportunity to urge all legitimate self-employed persons to contribute to the National Insurance Scheme. So I say to all employers on the whole, and to self-employed persons such as those in the medical field, the accountants, the entertainers, the seafarers, the vendors, the barbers, hairdressers, the farmers, the fisher folks, the minibus and taxi operators, and the developers. You are mandated under the National Insurance Act to remit the NIS contributions for all workers. And a failure to contribute is tantamount to a failure of workers to qualify for benefits under the scheme. Turning to the National Insurance Fund, Mr. Speaker, the House should know that at the end of March 2012 fiscal year, its total net assets of the fund registered a value of some $71.7 billion, marking an increase of some $5.2 billion over March 2011, which then had some net assets of $66.5 billion. A breakdown of the current assets of the fund of $71.7 billion show that the fixed income portfolio stands at $54 billion as at March 31st, 2012, and this accounts for some 75% of the fund's overall assets. The real estate portfolio stands at $7.7 billion as of the same date, accounting for some 11% of the fund's assets. And the equity portfolio stands at $9.3 billion as of the 31st of March 2012, and this accounts for some 13% of the overall assets of the fund. Mr. Speaker, in terms of contribution and benefit payments under the fund for the year March 2012, I wish to report the following. Contributions amounted to $9.5 billion, representing an increase of $1.8 billion or 24% over 2011. Pension benefits amounted to $11.5 billion, representing an increase of $0.7 billion or 6% over 2011. Benefit value then was $10.8 billion. The investment income amounted to $5.1 billion, representing a decrease of some $550 million or minus 9.8% over the March 2011 value of $5.6 billion. I wish to advise this Honourable House, Mr. Speaker, that inasmuch as it is undesirable for the growth and development of the fund to incur a deficit of $2 billion between contributions and benefits, it was necessary to draw on the fund's investment income in order to satisfy the demands of our valued pensioners. This is not a practice we intend to indulge in going forward, and our intention is to engage creative methods leading to a closure of the gap between contributions and benefits to maintain the fund's viability. Mr. Speaker, you may be aware that as it stands right now, the insurable wage ceiling, as it stands now, Mr. Speaker, is the maximum salary on which NIS and National Health Fund contributions are calculated. The insurable wage ceiling was last increased in August 2010 from $500,000 to $1 million per annum. Mr. Speaker, in that regard, based on the recommendations of the actuaries and with Cabinet's approval, with effect from January 7th, 2013, we intend to add a 50% increase, and this would push the insurable wage ceiling up from $1 million to $1.5 million. Under the proposed increase to insurable wage ceiling, Mr. Speaker, the maximum contribution by an employee will be $37,500 per annum, which will be matched by the employer. This increase in contribution, Mr. Speaker, resulting from the change in the wage ceiling will affect only employees earning in excess of $1 million per annum. All these measures will ensure the continued viability of the National Insurance Fund to meet future obligations, especially with the aging of the population and the increasing number of contributors who will become eligible for pension benefits in the future. Also pleased to announce, Mr. Speaker, that Cabinet has approved the recommendations coming from the actuaries for an increase in all categories of pension grants and allowances payable under the national insurance with effect from the 30th of January 2013. And these proposed increases are as follows. For old age, invalidity, widows and widowers pension, it will now move from $2,400 per week to $2,800. The three-quarter rate will be from $1,800 to $2,100, and the half rate will be from $1,200 to $1,400 per week. The maximum wage-related pension will move from $1,400 to $1,500. A sugar worker's pension will move from $1,200 to $1,400. And the orphan special child pension will move from $4,200 to $4,900. Dependent spouse allowance will go up from $800 to $900. The special anniversary pension, that's for people up in the 100 years bracket, will move from $1,200 to $1,400. That's for persons born before January 1908. Will move now from $4,500 to $5,000. In respect of employment injury benefit and disablement pension, it will now move from $320 to $3,200, and there will be no change in that at this time. Those, Mr. Speaker, will come to the House and we will have a full debate on it at the next sitting. They will be tabled later on this afternoon. Assistance to small and medium enterprises, Mr. Speaker.